we've gone past the halfway mark now. Last week, so we're in the last sections. So today we're going to get through 12. 13 we'll do next week. But we've gone past the halfway mark now. We're in the last. I can hear myself. Okay. You're going to record. You're going to start recording for us in a minute.
I was feeling about YouTube on you. We're okay to go.
Okay, good. Right, yeah. So I'm going to show in a minute. So yeah. So we've gone past the halfway mark, and this week we're going to spend on 12. Next week we're going to spend maybe 2 weeks, no more than 2 weeks, on 13. And the reason why is because 13 has lots of complications in it with the mark of the beast and what that number is and how do we calculate that number and what it means historically and issues and errors that we make with it when we do that. So so we're going to look at that, and that'll be next week. We double up on that one, and I can say to you that the mark of the Antichrist isn't Barack Obama, isn't Donald Trump, or whoever else we want to try and get on board with it, so we look at those parts as well, but this is the parts going to lead to it. So I'm going to start with start to share my screen, hopefully get into show status, and then hopefully I can start to share my screen. Get into here. So let me know when you can see my screen. Everybody can see my screen okay?
Not yet.
See now?
Yep, we're there now.
Yep, good. Okay. So Revelation 13, the woman and the dragon. And what I'm going to do this week, I'm going to take each section verse, read the verse, and then look at what's taking place in each section. So we'll take it piece by piece, piecemeal, so to say, and get it from that way around. All right. So so that's what I'll do, and hopefully it'll make some sort of sense as we go along. So this next point we have here, then, and so we have here now then. Woman and child, Revelations 12, 1 and 2 said, and a great portion appeared in heaven, and a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her feet, and a crown of head of 12 stars, and she was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs and in agony of giving birth. So we get this in Revelation here, that we have this particular narrative that takes place, and here's the part which is the portion of the woman and the child and the dragon in its adaptation. We get this narrative actually exists in the myth of Apollo, the birth of under which the author of Christ. So we get this in the other kind of Romanistic ideas and Hellenistic narrative. Apollo is the same kind of narrative that you get, same kind of story that you get, this woman and the stars and the heaven that's taking place. And so that we get in the same picture. And if you're thinking about this woman and how she's and who she is, we'd think, one second, it's very much looking like Mary, who is the mother that here. But as we begin to look at this, the image helps us to see what's happening. Okay, and it says, and the word sign comes from the Greek word seminion, which stands for a mark or unusual occurrence. The woman is clothed in the sun and with the moon under her feet and had a crown of 12 stars on her head. So we have this authority. So we have this authority that we have again. Remember, we have the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples, the 12 stars. This is that thing that's coming again. And the woman in the passage is Israel. The old exception is the woman points to Old Testament Israel. The woman with the 12 star represents the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is a kind of imagery narrative that's taking place. And you remember, you're always getting the 12 tribes of Israel it's a Judaic text, and we're always coming back to God's restitutive works in Israel, and the church becomes part of that. And the passage reveals that Israel was endowed with perfection of elegance. The moon and the stars belong to God, hence woman cannot attribute to evil intrigues whatsoever. So here we have this image, the woman, the stars, they're all symbolic. And when you put the symbols together, they make sense. But what you get is this woman pregnant in travailing. And so this do you remember sometimes people said, I'm pregnant with a vision? And if there's pregnancy that takes place, remember we get in Genesis, and the seed of the woman shall crush the head of the serpent in Genesis 3. And so we get this thing, the woman doesn't carry a seed. The man carries a seed. But here comes this narrative taking place, and he's saying, right, here it is, Israel stands, and here's what's taking place in the narrative. And so we have this thing, the moon, the stars, all that divinely God that's in place, and it's working from that perspective. And so we get the pregnancy and perspective delivery of a child. So the woman is pregnant. She's not just pregnant, she's far gone, and she's about to give birth. And you know, interestingly, do you know when Jesus dies on the cross, what leaves from it, that they see the other two men already dead, they break their legs. But with Jesus, they run a spear through his side, and that's a symbol of the birth of the church, because what comes from his side is water and blood. The sign of when a woman gives birth, when a water breaks, that's what happens, water and blood. And so we get this point, this now then becomes, so that's kind of the symbolic, literally, but here becomes a spiritual idea of it. And we have this pregnant woman image that takes place. And the woman is crying out in pain. Okay? And that's important for us to begin to understand, because now something is about to give birth. Women online here, sorry, if you haven't had a C-section, then you know every woman that gives birth, it doesn't matter, they have the time when they have the kicking of the child, when it's uncomfortable, and then it comes to a point when the child chooses when it's going to come, and that's it. And here comes a symbol that takes place. Okay, and so we get this taking place, and then we get first another sign to appear in the heavens, an enormous dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Rage appears and embattles the woman. So we get this woman that's about to give birth, and as she's about to give birth, here comes this dragon around her that's waiting for her to give birth. And here it is, it says, another sign appears in the heavens, an enormous dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns on each head. Rage and appear to embattle the woman. So the woman here is giving birth symbolically, and the dragon is there. And all these images do not make sense on their own. They are like sci-fi at the greatest extreme. I mean, the visionary writer is seeing these images, and it would be frightening at the very, very, very least to see this. And you can imagine the woman is now caught in fear. She's caught in pain, and they're waiting to ravage the child. Now, when we see this as a language that we see, we begin to see things in a different dimension of what we've seen before. Okay, because this now that's taking place, what's taking place now is where that which is about to be born is a threat to those who sit around it, and those who sit around it now then deem it fit to destroy what it is. And so the dragon is a designation of Satan, used 9 times in Revelation. So 9 times in Revelation, the dragon is used to represent Satan. So when you talk about this dragon, that's what you're talking about, right? And this dragon, a destination used for Satan, the Greek translation of the Old Testament uses a term of Leviathan, which means an enemy of God. So sometimes you see some movies come out with this particular point, but when it means it's the dragon, it means an enemy of God. It's opposed to God. And so when that dragon comes as an enemy of God. And interestingly, in chapter 12, in this chapter, this is the chapter, the only chapter where God is on trial. We'll come to it in a minute, where God is confronted by the enemy, and God is almost, so to say, put on trial. And the figure, you get it, mythology of the 7 successful rulers. So you get this idea of the 7 rulers that you have in the place, that this great represents the subordinate kingdoms and of that you have in place. You have these images that's taking place in the astrals, the spiritual, as well as in the natural. And so here it is. And this image is almost reminding us, which right could probably be looking at, is, you remember in Exodus, when Moses is to be born, and Egypt is waiting, metaphorically and literally, for the child to be born. Remember, it said, whenever the child is born, it says to the midwives, you must kill the child. The idiots pass in Egypt, remember, in Exodus. And so now then, the same image, the child is about to be born, kill the child. We get the same thing when Jesus is going to be born. There's a child that's been born. Herod said, go and kill every child. So that same dragon spirit, kill the child as soon as it's conceived. Don't look and say that baby's nice, kill it straight away. And so here we get the woman is about to give birth, and they stand ready for his annihilation. And that's the image we're getting here. And so there's hatred of the dragon. And then another portent appeared in heaven, and a great red dragon with 7 heads and then 10 horns and 7 diamonds on its head. His tail swept 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as it was born. Now, this point here that we get in 3 to 4 said, and 1/3 of the cosmic evil as a metaphor for Hurricans and excessive pride. We get the male child, the Divinic lines. So we get this idea. We get it also with when Satan falls from heaven, 1/3 of heaven he takes with him, of the angels. So here we get this image that's taking place. And when we take this particular point and said, and then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. Also, this could be symbolic to mean the church. So when Christ dies at Calvary, when Christ dies at Calvary, the mission that the enemy has is to destroy. But later I said, had they known, they wouldn't have crucified him. But here it is, they're thinking, if we can get rid of Jesus, we get rid of the prophecy, we get rid of the future, we get rid of the dynasty, we get rid of the legacy, we get rid of everything. And here they stand in power ready to destroy. So it goes back and says, 1/3 of heaven fallen. Here they are now then, they stand ready to devour the woman. And they stand in anticipation that here we're going to get. We get this also in Daniel 8 and 10, is that idea that here we have, and they excessive pride, they want to destroy all that is there. And so when we begin to read this part here, we read that this takes place, and they threw him down to earth, and then the dragon stood at the woman who was about to bear a child. And we get this narrative now taking place, that what's about to take place is a destruction, utter and complete destruction of that which is about to be born. Now then, with that being said and the language being used from it there, then we've got a few issues to pick up on here as well. Because if we're saying that's the case there, the hatred of the dragon, then what we then said is that here we've a great picture of flame in students, the Antichrist, we saw the Eastern people, the generation that come that we have this, and this image of this Antichrist image that we have is coming from Babylonian period. And we get this picture that is coming here, and it appears to completely to destroy it. And so we get this image that we begin to see that what is about to be born is about to be destroyed. And the dragon has 7 heads and horns, signify its mighty power. It has 7 royal diamonds. Now then, this signifies its complete power over the kingdom of this world as opposed to the kingdom of God. And the picture of dragons sweeping that start from heaven and the skies is a picture of what you get with Daniel, who cast out the stars from the ground and trampled them in 8:10. And the picture of dragon wavered to devour the child. Now that image we get from Jeremiah and Nebuchadnezzar, and he swallowed me up like a monster. We get it in Jeremiah 51:34. So here we get this whole thing that's taking place, and the cosmic powers are in control. Notice this: whatever power it is, it has a power on earth, not in heaven. Notice when the disciples said to Jesus, "Teach how to pray. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Here we get the powers that are on earth only. They have power on earth, but not in heaven. What am I saying to you is this? The heavens is where God sits. Satan is the prince of the earth, but they know that his power is limited to this level only. Remember when Paul says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood in Ephesians 6 and 12. He said, but we against principalities in high places. So here we have this realm that takes place. Satan's on ground level, and he's fighting against the imagery that we have from here. And the fight, the struggle that we find is always a fight between God and Satan, good and evil. And the ultimate fight takes place at Calvary. And so this imagery is followed through what we get here. So we get this place where it has authority. Remember, Rome has 7 hills. When writers talking, maybe the image is used is that the 7 hills of Rome, because those 7 hills of Rome represented the birthplace and the outstarting of the Roman Empire. Now, the 7 hills is important because we're going to see it when we get to chapter 13, because where you begin to take the idea of it from, and it becomes from that narrative. So when we begin to see from that narrative, we see, all right, what's happening here? And that's what we begin to see from here. Such representation.
We all did creative stuff, but what route they chose to go.
Somebody's, right, okay. So now we get to the next point, verse 4. And a dragon is portrayed as powerful, who flung 1/3 of the stars to the earth, entering a woman expecting a child. Okay, so we get this point here, and it stands and is powerful, has authority, has authority to snatch away, to destroy. And that image comes right, and the woman is going to give birth, and the earth is trembling in anticipation of what's going to take place. And that anticipation begins to set the scene as what's going to take place now, because now God is about to be confronted by the enemy. And so they snatched away the child, and she gave birth to a son, a male child, who's a ruler of nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken, to God and to his throne. So here now then, nothing could stop it taking place. The child which the woman bore was destined to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Okay, and we get this from this is kind of from Psalms 2:9. We get this narrative from, and when the child was born, that he was rescued from the dragon and snatched into heaven to be the throne of God. So the dragon just about to take the child, and the child is rescued. And here it's snatched in the same use. We get this like in Ephesians 1:4, it talks about which the second coming taken away, the snatched away. We get it when Paul talks about it, which was taken away, snatched up to meet him in the air. We get that's this hope, and also get it when Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians, when he says about this thing, he's telling me that I tell you a secret in 2 Corinthians 12, where he's snatched away, taken away from this place elsewhere. And so in a sense, this passage though is rather it can be confusing, Because in the image we get, this whole thing I put together would seem as if we're talking about Jesus, the Messiah. And John tells us the story goes straight from the birth to ascension. And snatching, with this thing we get in Acts 1, where Jesus is lifted up. Remember, in the ascension we get. And so we get this, and this here is a total image of the earth life of Jesus. But this is a battle that's taking place, and this fight that takes place, it's spiritual, and the enemy has the power to do, but he can't, because there's, as soon as the enemy's about to destroy, there's a snatching away that takes place, and all this is a thing to come. In this point, John at this moment is interested in anything that Jesus was delivered from the direction by God, for hostile powers attacked him. The truth of the fact that all of Revelation, John's interest is not in Jesus, but in the exaltation of Christ, and who's been able to rescue his people from the distresses of their time. So let me put it to you in this way around. There's a difference between Jesus and Christ. Jesus was a common name at the time. Yahshua, it's a common Jewish name. But the anointed one is exclusive. So when they talk about Jesus, the Christ, Jesus the anointed one, that's different. Because interestingly enough, when Jesus at Calvary, when Jesus is going to be tried, this is one of the theological issues you have. He's tried by another man called Barabbas. But one of the theological arguments is that his name is Yahshua Barabbas. In other words, Jesus Barabbas. And so he said, which Jesus do you want me to give you? Jesus, the anointed one, or Jesus Barabbas? Jesus, the Christ. Because Jesus, the Christ, is different from Jesus, the man. And so when we get this image that's taking place, Jesus, the Christ, who's taken at heaven, where the enemy would look to destroy him and annihilate him completely, John's saying this one, this is whom is the groom of the church. This one is a rescuer of the church itself. Okay, and that becomes this image that's being played out in this point. So, and what he's saying is, one of the arguments you have here is that what we see is the enemy is trying to destroy the church. And as he's trying to destroy the church, at the same time, God is rescuing the church. In this COVID period time, it's interesting. I was talking to one of the ministers here. I said, the minute the church opened, and we were able to get back in church physically, COVID began to decline. Now, doctors will say, well, maybe that's based upon injection improvement, blah, 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 whatever might be the case. But what you've got to understand is they said, and I was reading a research article, said during COVID, the least amount of change of COVID was in the church. And so we get this thing where things are happening against the church, and God is saying, I'll snatch the church, rescuing the church from where it is to where it needs to be. And so here we get that narrative, and it's snatched away, taken away. This is this kind of rapture that takes place in this text here. And so he gave birth to a son, and he's the prospect ruler of the earth. The child was snatched up and snatched to God, and to his throne. You shall break them with a rod of iron and cast them to pieces like a potter's vessel. We can see this narrative in Psalms 2:9. And the child in Revelation comes to be a symbol of, so a lot of symbolism. Being snatched by God gives a clue to the name of the child, Jesus, as it was the son of the prospective ruler of the earth. This coincides with the prophecies of the Bible. So remember, the audience who are reading this church now, when they're reading this, said that the clue of who this child was that you're talking about. This child is Jesus. This child is the one that, not just you, but Jesus, the Christ. And so the symbols are in there that is the perspective of the rule of the earth. He should rule the earth, but he will come back and set his kingdom back up again. But here it comes, say, right, in this psalm, remember, they're always taking narratives from Old Testament quantify and qualify what's taking place in this as well. So we get that taking place, and that he will rule the nations. So we get this. The idea of he shall rule the nation is a narrative that comes from the Davidic line. So the line of David, from where Jesus would come, and this is the line that he shall rule the nation with the iron rod. But he shall rule the nations. And snatched away to God. And then when we get this exalted, snatched away, it means to be exalted unto God. So when when Jesus dies, he's not annihilated, he's not destroyed, but he's taken up to God and sits at the right hand of our Father. And that's the kind of narrative that's taken place in the text. And the flight of the woman to the desert. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that she may nourish for 1,260 days. So the idea now that the woman goes to the wilderness, we get this other language. We get in Jesus born. Mary goes down to Egypt, and this is the narrative that's taking place in the text. So we take this place. She goes, and this is like the 3.5 years language that we're getting taking place in the text itself. And when she's into the wilderness, a place of refuge and salvation based upon Exodus tradition. So the wilderness represents a place of refuge. It's not always a bad place. Testing, securing, protecting. Remember, Jesus, after being baptized, he doesn't go to the palace, doesn't go to Bible school, he goes to the wilderness. And the wilderness plays a point in how we understand it. So the wilderness itself is a point of that depicts the rescue from Satan. And that's what we're getting in this narrative that's taking place, that God rescues Israel or Jesus from Satan, and Satan is the one that would try to destroy and annihilate, but God rescues. And here the woman escapes into the desert from attacking the enemy by the help of God. And it says where she is nourished. It's something that's been prepared for her by God. And from this we get lots of pictures in this image. There's a picture when Elijah to the Syria where he was nourished by ravens. Remember in 17 Kings 1:7, he goes into the wilderness, and here's the strange thing: birds that are usually scavengers, i.e., they don't give. God swaps it around, and the birds that would normally take now give. Whilst he's in the wilderness, and he's nourished, and God sends a messenger to him. We also get the picture of that with Mary and Joseph when they escaped to Egypt from Herod in Matthew 2, and these two pictures is in the mindset of John when he's writing. Remember, he's writing these things, and all these things are in their memory, is in their mindset. I'll give you an example. If I was to talk about people who came to England first, about what it was like coming to England and the Windrush generation, they would tell you stories, and nearly every story says this: I came here only for maybe 4 or 5 or 10 years tops. That's because I'm going to make the money and go back. I've not met a story that didn't have it in it. And so what happens when I talk about Windrush and come to England, I have to use the term temporary, but temporary becomes permanent. Because in the middle of writing about that story, in the backdrop of your mind is that narrative. When he's talking this picture here, in the backdrop of his mind is what's happened historically. Elijah had it, Mary and Joseph had it. They go to this wilderness, and when they get there, God provides protection for them. And so when we get this, it's part of what we have. But also this narrative outside of the Protestant canon, in the Catholic canon, we get the Maccabean narrative. and it's a Judaic history. And Antioch, when death was to keep the Lord to worship true God, we have this idea where he's sent to the wilderness for protection. We have this particular narrative that takes place, and in the backdrop of this writing, you got to bear this in mind. This wilderness image is also the idea. Notice this in AD 70 at the Battle of Masada. After there was the bloodshed and annihilation of people and the mass suicide at the end, what you get was you had just a smaller map that are left, and there they go, and they leave from Israel into Jerusalem into the wilderness. And though the temple is gone, the nation destroyed, nothing to be destroyed again, there's still elements of it left in the wilderness. And God still says, I'll keep a remnant in protection. And so we get this that takes place in this particular point here. And God provides it, and it's this 3.5 years period that we have from here. Okay? And said, and the woman fled into the wilderness and spent 260 days in this place prepared by the Lord. The writer's got to be thinking about Psalm 23. He prepares me a table in the presence of my enemies. Notice this, it's not prepared by any man, but only by the Lord. So the Lord prepares it, and as he prepares it in that space there, what we get is the protection, the fleeing and protection, and then we get the place of where they're there, and we get it also a place of where there is stability and safety. And the Lord prepares a place. The Lord prepares the meal. The Lord prepares it in the wilderness. We can say this about the church. In this COVID period, in this time that we've been here off for now, the Lord has really kept the church and has grown the church in the midst of its wilderness. In the midst of the wilderness, God has kept the church. And some churches will not open again, but tell you a fact, many churches have grown expeditiously during the lockdown. Just by this alone, we see that many people are seeing the church in a new dimension. If I said to you, a year and a half ago, we should go online and do Zoom and blah, 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 we'd say to you, no, you're crazy. It will never work. It will never work. Now, we realize, 1 second, in the wilderness of church, this is what's happened. I was looking back at some of the reads last year, and some of my friends was this time last year, my friend said, this time last year with Dad's funeral, this time last year with Dad's funeral, this time last year with my wife's funeral, my brother's funeral, my sister's funeral, my aunt's funeral, my uncle's funeral, my brother's funeral, this time last year. And it seems that the death row would not come to an end, but somehow God has kept the church. I have some friends in India. I've been trying to get hold of them and saying, is everybody okay? Because when I spoke to another friend, they said, we have over 3,000 deaths per day, excluding those that we don't know about. And so what we get in the midst of this devastation, in the midst of this wilderness, God says, sit at the table. I'm going to nourish you. And that's what we get in this narrative here. And so we get to, so whilst in the wilderness, it says that war breaks in heaven between Angel Michael and his angels against the dragon and Satan. So we get in this next section here into the heavenly realms. And when we get here, we see that war breaks out in the heavens. And we notice this every single time we get this. And this narrative follows its place from Daniel. Remember, 21 days he withstood me. And we get this fight in the heavenly realms that takes place. And whatever that realm looks like, the war between the dragon and the ancient spirit of Satan, and all these names describe the one being, evil being, and Michael and his angels stand. Michael, you need Michael in your corner fighting. Michael's a fighter. He's got the scars to show for it, but he's undefeated. and he's fighting with his angels. And the idea that seems that the dragon pursues the Messiah even to heaven. And once it gets to there, this is a spiritual realm that's taking place. Is met with an outcast of, is met with a defense from heaven. I say this to you, Satan's fighting the church, even to the church front door, but he has to be met with the prayer of the saints who fight him in spiritual things. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. It's a spiritual fight. And this is a complicated picture. It's a complicated picture that we have. And also the image, these narratives would not make sense, let's say, for example, in our Protestant narrative, because you get this image narrative coming from Enoch, for example, the Babylonian story that we have, the fight that takes place. And then also we talk about when Satan falls in heaven, and we get in Isaiah 41 said, how you have fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn. The sin which caused heaven, which caused him to fall, was pride. Let me just put a pin in it for you there now. Pride. Pride is dangerous. It's one of the most dangerous sins you could ever have in your life. Timothy 1:3-6 says, every preacher must be kept away from pride. Don't have pride in you. Oftentimes, if I'm going to speak, I question my credibility. I question, Lord, don't let my flesh come in the front. Just let your spirit. Sometimes I allow my flesh to take the place. I said, Lord, minimize. Whenever I preach, I always say, Lord, minimize me, maximize you. I want you to get this clear. At the front door of the church is not your name, not my name, not the minister's name. It's the name of the Lord. His name is on the front door. Satan saw that he thought he could take over heaven, just thought it, and with pride, because of how glamorous, how wonderful it was. And what is right saying is, no matter what position you are in church, you must always keep your pride under check. Pride is a destruction of nations, of people. Notice this. It says in Ephesians 2:2 says, for Satan is the prince, not the king, prince of the air. When Satan was cast down from heaven, the dwell place in the air, which he had to wander, that is why he's sometimes called the prince of the air. He's not a kingship status. That's why Jesus Christ is called Lord of Lord, King of King, not prince. And here we have this image that takes place. And so when it gets there, we get this image, we get also this stronghold, this strong land, this Old Testament narrative, God's angels stand charge against Satan. In Job, we find that Satan is numbered amongst the sons of God, and the person of access to the presence of God. In Zechariah, we also find that Satan is in the presence of God in Zechariah 3:1-2. Satan has his access point. But we understand that this has a point to a certain level. And that's why we get this narrative that takes place. But what we get here, he tries to storm the heavens, and God sends his angels against him. And so we get this also. We understand this. Do you remember we also get when the Lord angel, so when angel of the Lord who stood in the path of Balaam, remember Balaam was going to try and give a false prophecy, and the donkey kicks against him and stops him. We also get with the Philistines that David feared that the Philistines would be there, say there'd be that enemy would come against them. And so we have this whole point of being an opposition. There's an attack, there's an opposition. And that's why, church, when we pray, we're fighting spiritual things. Okay, and Satan, the enemy of God. And the war broke in heavens, and Michael fought against the dragon and his angels fought back. But that point there, the but is very, very important. I should have underlined it. But they were defeated, and there was no longer place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent, who was called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So here we get the enemy is thrown down. There's a war that takes place, and after it finished, it says there's no place lost for him. There's a literature that's called Milton's Paradise Lost. Okay, one of the tradition that the archangels they come before him and they're destroyed completely and moved out of where they are. They have no space, nothing left at all, and there's no space for them left in heaven, and they're thrown out. And when they're thrown out of heaven, where they get to this earthly realm, and so that becomes an image that they're thrown down and thrown out. And so we get to the next point. The strong. Let me turn my phone off. Sorry. We get this next point that we say they're thrown out of heaven. And when they're thrown out of heaven, they have no space left in heaven. The strong and defeated, right? And we get in verse 8. So verse 9 now, the word Satan, devil, ancient Satan, come in to replace the dragon. Satan is said to be the one who leads the world astray and is hurled down with all the angels in heaven. So when we talk about Satan, it's an ancient, well, that word actually comes out of Egyptology, in the Egyptic language. And so when we talk about him, because in the Old Testament we don't get Satan, we don't get devil in there, we get Satan, or we get the accuser that comes in that narrative. Okay, and in that verse 9, it says this. The great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent who was called the devil, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown to the earth, and the angels were thrown with him. Okay, and in this here, the change of language takes place. And the great dragon thrown down. This is the eschatological expulsion of Satan from heaven. We get this in Luke 10:18. So here's the point: Satan is expelled from heaven, and it's based upon ancient Jewish myth that we get. Ancient serpent Satan is this idea that he's fallen from heaven and all these demons that comes with him. And so he's expelled from heaven. And when he's expelled from heaven, he has no more authority in there. So then when he comes back, this is how to pray. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There's no disruption. There's no disorder. There's no pride. It's God's perfect will in heaven. And so this, the song of the martyrs in glory. Because we know that Satan means accuser. Accuser. We get this very much in Job 1 and Zechariah. The accuser comes. Have you considered your servant Job? In court, we have the accuser with the witnesses. When we get in this particular narrative, you notice sometimes people accuse people of things at church based upon what? With an agenda. You know, something I've seen is that a lot of things take place in church where you have an accusatory process that takes place. And this is what the nature you get with Satan. And in verse 10 it says, he said, I heard the sound of you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked. This is Genesis we get here now. In the fall of man, Genesis 3. Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten the tree of life, which I commanded you not to eat? The man said, the woman whom you gave to me gave me the fruit to eat. Notice in this narrative now, the martyr here is Adam and Eve, chapter 3, should have put chapter 3 there, sorry, of Genesis. And once they're now in this place where Satan has left them, and they said, I heard the sound of you in the garden. and I was afraid. The accuser, all the accuser does is cause trouble and steps away from it. That's all he has to do. Okay? Verse 10, victory of salvation announced, and Satan named the accuser of our brothers and sisters. So here we now then come. The accuser appears, and the accuser of the brothers and sisters. So the historical background of the age in which Revelation was written gives us an image of Satan, the informer. You know, they got some Jamaican things that informer for dead, right? Forgive that Jamaican twang there, but here it comes. He's the informer. Constantly, people are constantly being tortured. They're being killed. In this time, the church is volatile. It doesn't know who to trust. It doesn't know what to trust. It didn't know. It was cynical about certain things. And the church is in this space here. And they said, who's in amongst us is an accuser? Who's in amongst us can we trust? Can't we trust? And then we see also, as a result of this, God cleanses heaven. Satan is cast out. And for this reason, is a martyr song of the glory of heaven is sung. Notice when Moses got across the Red Sea, what did Miriam do? They started to sing a song of praise. Victory. It's vitriolic that they're doing. And the martyrs is in conquest of Satan. The martyrs have proven superiority over every seduction, of every threat that they have from the enemy. They've been confronted by the enemy. They've been pressed down by the enemy. But the martyrs themselves still begin to sing. You know that sometimes the most powerful weapon the church has is to sing and worship, is to worship. When we begin to worship, it does something. It's a weapon. Worship is a weapon. Worship is a weapon. See, victory of the martyrs is won by the blood of the Lamb. There's two meanings of this. First meaning is that there's a cross through which victory is attained through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Some of the writings in Acts, they're songs of praise. That's what it was been. Secondly, is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for sin, for the forgiveness of sin. Man accepts Jesus by faith. Christ has done the work at Calvary. Sin is wiped out. I want you to understand this, that at Calvary, only Jesus alone does the work. Jesus alone forgives. Jesus alone wipes out sin. Jesus alone does it. And this is an announcement of the church against the enemy. Okay? And so we get victory that takes place with this. And this victory that we do, for anybody come to Christ, there is no condemnation. And then also the victory of the martyrs means that they lived a great principle of gospel. They considered nothing more in their life of loyalty to God. God wants loyalty, wants our commitment to him. In this day and age which we're in now, we're seeing things begin to change. And I've seen so many pastors, not for any reason, just decide, right, bangs on the head. It's not for me. I don't believe Jesus Christ died. No, I can do this. You know, I speak to some people who are academics, much more well-versed than me, much more well-known than me. I said to them, right, if you're an academic and you PhD in whatever, professorship in whatever, and you say to me that you don't believe in God, then I think that you are lazy. Now, it seems contrary to I would say that. I said, but you're spiritually lazy, because when you begin, if you take the effort to look and search at Jesus Christ and look at who he is in history, what's done in history, what's done over a period of time, then what you find is that he's victorious in every way, shape, or form. And the church of the martyrs that we have are those who are martyred for the kingdom's sake. There's a story of a church in an Eastern Bloc when it was not allowed to have Christians. So the gunmen went into the church and they said, right, anybody who wants to live must denounce their faith. But those who will not denounce their faith must stay, and they will die. And you know what happened? A batch of people got up and left. And when the batch of people got up and left, those who are left said, right, you're willing to die. They said, yes, we will not denounce our faith. And the gunmen shut the door of the church, locked it up and said, now let's worship. Now we've got the real Christians in here. The martyr says, right, even if I'd lay my life down, therefore then I will still worship him. The term witness, when he said, I want to be a witness for the Lord, the term witness basically means to be a martyr, to die. And so here it is. The principle runs through the Gospels all the way straight through, that following Jesus is a matter of dying for your faith. It's not necessarily dying for your faith, but loyal to your faith of who Jesus is. The passage finishes that Satan is cast out of heaven, has come down to earth. His power in heaven is broken, but it still has power on earth, and it rages ferociously against the church. So Satan, that's why our prayers are directed to heavenly realms, because Satan has no power there. And when we speak to God in heaven, he sends his power down to earth. And that's what we have to begin to fight. And then the blood of the Lamb is introduced as an instrument in gaining victory over the devil in verse 10. So in verse 10 now then I heard a loud voice in heaven, and a voice proclaiming, now have come salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, the Father, the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of the comrades has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before God. So Satan brings it before God, but guess what? He has no authority. And Jesus is under the blood. So we get the lamb that sacrifice. We get the death of Christ. Everything the enemy has. And notice this. That's why there's a song that says, we sing a song where when we sing, the angels will fold their wings. When we begin to worship God, and he said, what art man? I'm mindful of him. Because we have salvation. And so we get this verse 12. Heaven rejoiced as the devil has been sent to earth. The earth and the sea was to suffer the terms of the devil's mischiefs. So Satan comes to earth, is conquered paradoxically. Jesus is and I wanted and taking this thing here in this particular verse here, Satan is sent on earth, and notice this. When he comes, he tries to destroy Jesus through Herod, tries to destroy him through the waters and the seas, but in every particular way, Jesus still survives, and the enemy still comes. So Jesus becomes the one that says, "Heavens rejoice, the devil is defeated." First, the woman pursues the woman who had a sire and a child, and the dragon at first pursues the woman to the earth. So we get this whole point, and I'm going to read the verse. Let me just go back a second. Sorry, Lord of mercy. And so I'm going to be forward for further I want to get to. Bear with me a second. Yeah, right. Good. So we get this whole pursuit that takes place to earth, and verse 13 says, the dragon saw that the woman had been thrown to earth, and they began to pursue the woman who had given birth to the male child. And so notice this. So the dragon pursues a woman to child to earth. Now watch this. Now Jesus is in the wilderness, and Satan said to Jesus in the wilderness, if thou art, if, take up this bread and turn it into stone. Turn this stone turn into bread. If thou art, throw yourself from here. He said that would not cause your foot to hit against the rock. If all this belongs to me, if you will bow down and worship me, all this I will give to you. Satan offering Jesus in the wilderness what he already owned. He said, you're offering me because you're the prince of this, but I made it myself. So you can't offer me what I already made. I own it. And so the dragon now then begins his attack. And here we begin that in verse 13 now, 13 all the way straight through. And we read this text here. Then the Lord said to the woman, what is it that you have done? The woman said, the serpent tricked me. And this is, we get this in Genesis 3 and at 8. Lord the serpent, because you've done this, cursed are you amongst all animals and among all the wilderness. Upon your belly shall you go and eat the dust of all the earth in the days of your life. I put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers, and he will bruise, so strike your head, and you shall strike his heel. The woman said, I will greatly increase my pains in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Yet your desire shall be to your husband, and he shall rule over you. And to the man he said. We get this idea. In other words, when Satan falls, he pursues man to earth and tries to destroy the seed which is in Eve. And the woman now, and the eagle's wings flew to a safer place out of the dragon's reach. Okay? And we get in this particular point here, here are certain symbols. The dragon can conjure up a child by, injure the child, by injuring the mother. Let's just say that if I can cause destruction to Eve, I can cause destruction to the child. Notice when Christ is risen in Acts 9, it says, when Jesus is risen and Paul is on the Damascus road, notice what Jesus said to him. He said to Saul, who was persecuting the Christian, he said, Saul, Saul. The double mention of the name means covenant. He's about to call Saul, but Saul doesn't know it. Then he says to him, why do you persecute me? In other words, the church, when persecuted, is a way to get to Jesus. If Satan can destroy the church, if he can hurt the church, he can hurt God. That's why his attack is upon the church always. His attack is always on the church. It's always upon the church, always on the church. And then we also seen already in Revelation 12:6 that the woman escapes to the desert, the place, the church, right? And sorry about this. The church escapes to safety. Now, here's an interesting thing. In chapter 12:6, right, the woman escapes in the desert to a place called Pella, P-E-L-L-A. That's on the other side of Jordan. And it was a place the other side before the destruction of Jerusalem. But in the escape of the woman, the attack of the dragon, John used a different picture of the Old Testament to say, here it is of Israel, the escape to safety. What we always find here is the church is attacked, but God makes a way out. The church is attacked, but God gives us safety. And then the eagles here, wings, are symbols of upbearing arms of God. You see this, that God lifts Egypt out of its destruction. Like an eagle, it stirs up the nest. We get this later on, and catching them and bearing them. We get this in later on, and in scriptures, and we see that the eagle's nest is stirred up. And when the eagle's nest is stirred up, like it stirs up its nest, the young ones flutter and they drop from the air. And once they're dropping, the mother will swoop down and take them on her wings and lead them to safety. This same image that God swoops down in the rustling of the nest and takes them to safety is imperative. Have we understand this? That the church has always been on attack under the enemy at this time, and it's come blow after blow after blow, but God provides and makes a way out. That's why no matter what you do to the church, no matter what you do to the church, in the first century of the church, the more the persecution came, and the Bible said, and 5,000 was added to them. Where you find persecution, you often find growth in the church. History tells you that. And he says, remember this, it said in Isaiah 43:2 said, when you pass through the waters, I will be there. So the serpent pursues a woman by spewing waters from his mouth. Satan is seen to have persistent war against God and the people of God. The earth will open, swallow the rivers. So notice this: when the children of Israel went through Egypt, through the wilderness, through the Red Sea, the sea was supposed to drown them, but God made a way out for them. There's this constant thing where God rescues the church from the enemy in all the enemy tries to do. And so when the enemy now then comes to trying to do it, that opens the earth, God rescues his people. He rescues the people from the rage of the devil. The devil will pour out water, but God said, I'll open the ground and let the ground consume it. You cannot drown it. And notice this. It says, the serpent pursues a woman, spewing water from his mouth. In other words, to destroy. The only person that spewed water before was God when he destroyed the earth when Noah was there. So we get the same thing Satan tries to duplicate, but doesn't do so. And the earth opens it and the spirits, and God uses it in means to save his people from the rage of the devil. Finally, John's image of God doing war against the enemy and the rest of the family and woman with the church tells us that God is coming to spread the persecution. So that tells that the devil is coming to spread persecution across the church, but God will protect the church. That Satan has been cast down, is convulsing, is angry, is mad. He wants to bring agony to the church, but no matter what he tries to do, the church will still worship God. The church will still roll on. Okay? And verse 17 goes back to war. The offsprings are keepers of God's commandments and hold their first testimony of Jesus. This chapter ends with the devil persisting well against the remainder of the offspring of the woman, i.e. Israel. So no matter what the enemy does, he tries and does this, and he tries to destroy the church. This leads perfectly, not the church, but the people of God, leads perfectly now till we get to chapter 13. And now then, when we get into chapter 13, is when we begin to see the real war beginning, ups the ante. And then we begin to see what the enemy tries and do against the people of God. Thank you. So that's all my talking there. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor. That was thorough and that was detailed and that was beautifully executed. It has been a most magnificent time of teaching of the end times this week. And I just want to say thank you for enlightening us with the scriptures. Thank you so much. For those, that's it. Thank you. Okay, we are going to continue with our time of question and answers, and I'm going to